These are a few thoughts by Simon Wiesenthal. Whoever still had illusions after the Reichskristallnacht, what the National Socialists had planned on the Jewish people, failed to recognize the driving force of the evil which had manifested itself at that time. Everything objectionable and wicked, every evil characteristic was projected upon the Jewish minority. It was then easy for the perpetrators to overcome the barrier which separated life and death for their victims. Not even the children were spared.
The 9th of November night was always a theme that was haunting my childhood and when I was young in Vienna. Because I was born 48, that means after the war, and Vienna was really a dark, bleak place at that time. I remember as a child I always thought I was born in a limbo. It was like everybody seemed to be depressed. Many houses were bombed still and not reconstructed. And I never heard anybody sing or laugh. So it seemed that after the war in Austria, and I think in Germany it was very similar, people have lost the memory and have lost the ability to talk and to speak and reflect. It was too much. And I remember one day that I realized that there was a couple walking by our house. And they looked really different than anybody else. They were very skinny and very pale. But the way they walked was odd because they were holding each other very tight. They didn't look at anybody. They just looked at the ground. And they walked by very fast. Nobody could tell me who they were. So I was very insistent as a child. They kept asking. And it was obvious for me that it would cost them so much effort to get the word out. And the word was, they are Jews. So I've never heard anything like that. So I said, what is that? And I got so interested because nobody would talk about something that obviously happened. I could feel it. And the same thing in school. Nobody would talk, you know. Nobody mentioned anything. So it became a passion, and it was like a journey of research. As soon as I could read, I started to read the newspapers. I started to read whatever I could get. And then I found out that there were many court cases going on against the people who worked in concentration camps. I remember a couple, two brothers, who were running a concentration camp. And then I read all these horrible things they did, how they tortured people, how they killed with their own hands. And then, in these court cases, these guys went free. So for me, my sense of justice as a kid was broken because the idea that somebody gets tortured or killed or somebody's causing pain to somebody. As a child, always that was something that haunted me. It seemed to be unbearable, especially children. So I always thought about children. And it was actually the main reason that I started to paint. I was always uncertain what I should do. I started to get scared. I said, I don't fit in this society. What should I be? There's nothing, whatever the society has to offer, I wouldn't fit in, you know. And there was this one moment when I was 18 when I suddenly thought, you become an artist, a painter. Because as an artist, it's the last resort in that society, the last place where I could fit in. Because I would make my own rules, you know. I can express whatever I want to express. But still, you can have a certain impact on the society. So that was the reason I painted. It was actually not aesthetic reasons when I started. It was the idea of expressing what was my burden, you know, over all these years, you know. My generation had such a big problem with the past, with our parents' generation. There was such a break between these two generations. It led to the student revolution in the 60s. Yes. Because we could not relate to our parents' generation and their beliefs and their belief system, and it couldn't be more foreign and absurd. I remember an interview with the #1 psychiatrist of Vienna at that time, Dr. Gross. In this interview, the reporter asked him, is it true that you killed several hundred children in the war? And Dr. Gross said yes. And he seemed to be very relaxed. So the reporter said, so you're telling me that you injected the poison or something like that? He said, no. We did it very humane because we mixed the poison into the food. So the children were not even aware that they were going to die. And so when I read this interview, I was amazed. But I was much more amazed that nobody would react. Like there was not one letter to the editor, not one protest. So I phoned the news magazine and said to them, I need a page. Give me a page, I want to paint an open letter to this doctor. So the only thing I did, I read the interview again and I just painted exactly what Dr. Gross said. Like I painted this child eating, and so I painted this plate with the food, and the child laying with the head, with closed eyes, in the food. And now, after this painted letter, suddenly there was a huge reaction. So people now protested, and people wanted him to be kicked out, and people started to write about it. It was another instance where I saw that with a picture you can obviously reach so much deeper. And then I realized that art, for me, was a weapon. It was like a weapon to strike back. For me, the process of painting, of art, is total intuition. Like the painting Epiphany, I really wanted to recreate a Renaissance painting. And that's the only art that I knew when I was a child, because I grew up basically in Roman Catholic churches. So overwhelming. I mean, beautiful, but also scary at the same time. And it's like, when you walk in, the vibrations are breathtaking, because you feel these 1,000 years of history. Very often they are very violent history. I wanted to recreate this scene with Madonna and the child and the 3 wise men around her. And I wanted to create a version of that in the 20th century, after the Holocaust. The picture that I found was these officers standing around the Führer, and all this adoration and this respect and the dignity of these handsome officers, I used now in connection with the Madonna and the child. All my artwork has triggered, from beginning on, always enormous reactions, emotional reactions, but also very aggressive reactions. And especially in the beginning, like on my first exhibition, I remember that once day when I came to the exhibition, look at the work and the people, I saw that I had a sticker on each of my paintings, and it said, Entarte de Kunst, which means degenerate art. And again, at that time I didn't know anything about it. That's how I started to look it up and to learn and to search, you know. And then I found out that they called anything they didn't like, or Hitler didn't like, degenerate art. And when I think how many pictures have been destroyed, like Hitler burned more than 13,000 works of art in Berlin, and a much bigger number of paintings were confiscated and taken out of the museums and were sold in auctions in Switzerland. And what very few people know, that the income of these sold paintings went into the private pocket of Adolf Hitler. It was his personal revenge against the art.
Well, there's, I think in anything that's really relevant and emotional art, is that there's some kind of a mirror that people experience. I don't think that you can recognize a feeling from something that you look at unless it's part of yourself. And so when someone is willing to take on the sadness, the irony, the ugliness, and the beauty in the kind of way that Gottfried does, it's something that is, I guess for me, it is relevant to consider it, just that it is so clear, it is art. And so there's that, and then there's this striking talent that he does it with. So it's particular because of the talent. And the talent, like any talent, is largely the choice, as well as the skills that he has.
I bought this painting because it was one of the most impressive paintings I think I had ever seen. And it was also a good representation for me of how I grew up in America. children are not as valid, so to speak, as they should be. It's the parents that control everything. And so you have the kid, who is the most important, I think, aspect of society, being treated as if, you know, he or she isn't, but it's actually the opposite. And so I got that from this painting. So it's amazing to see that reaction from people my age that were once kids growing up in the suburbs the way I grew up. It's almost universal when it's a person who has a similar reality to mine when they see this. They know almost right away, that's them, this is us, you know?
A great work of art for me is like, you don't forget it. Yeah, that's why you have certain images that you don't forget. And that's the great privilege of an artist, that you, and that's the responsibility, that you can make people look at certain things that they would rather like to forget.
Look at these children. Look at these children's faces. Multiply their number by a few 100,000, and only then will you realize or gain an inkling of the extent of this Holocaust, the greatest tragedy in human history.
For me, Crystal Night, or Kristallnacht as the Nazis called it, was the crucial moment in this development. Because the idea that within one night, all the synagogues burned, all the shops of Jewish people were destroyed. It was such an enormous blow. So when there was the 50th anniversary, I was amazed, because I was living close to Cologne. I was amazed that nobody talked about it. Nobody mentioned it. And so I said, I want to remember them.
It was Gottfried Helnwein's captivating and convincing idea to present the consequences of this period without mercy in such an unconventional manner. He made no use of photos of heaped corpses. Children's portraits forced the observer to stop and face this idea.
I started to photograph children in the area of Cologne, and then I picked out different faces, blew them up, and lined them in a long row, just the faces. And at the beginning of this long row of pictures, I placed this word Selektion. And this German word Selektion, which of course means selection, is for me the key word to this tragedy. Because we're very often distracted when we talk about the Nazi time. We think of smartly dressed SS officers and rallies of thousands of people and things like that. But I think that's distracting. I always was interested in the roots, the idea of selection, the idea that a group of people has the right to select what is worth to live and what has no right to live, which is of course absolutely nonsense. That's why I wanted people to stand in that position, look at these faces, and select. And then I found actually an amazing location right in front of the Dome of Cologne. It was a path that didn't belong to the city. It belongs to the Deutsche Bundesbahn, to the National Railway. And there was one guy in charge for anything that had to do with art projects. And I talked to the guy and I said, yeah, use it. And that was the most visible spot, So if you would stay in front of the Dome of Cologne or the Museum Ludwig or wherever you were, you saw that. And I was actually amazed what an emotional reaction I got from people. I like to reach out with my art to meet new people and to communicate. And I must say, it's a learning process, because I learn a lot from the reaction of people, from the questions they ask, from the stories they tell me. It's actually the resource and the main inspiration for my next artwork, always. For me, art was always a dialogue. 50% is the artist who produces it, and 50% is the onlooker. And you need both. And the second part is as important as the first part. And that's how I understand my work. So the test for me is always, does it work out in the street, on public places, with people who don't intend to a gallery, who don't care about art? So all these encounters are part of the process. And after a few days, in the night, somebody came and cut all the throats of all the children. And when I came and I looked at that, I was amazed that somebody would do something like that. But I decided not to replace the pictures. I just patched them up because I thought that's a part of the process. Yeah? It shows that if you showed that 1988 in Germany, there's still enough of this potential and the anger, and that's the reaction.
Well, the world's a haunted house, and he at times is you know, our tour guide through it. And you know, you're talking about people's bloodlines, people's fathers, grandfathers, involvements and things, a history of a sense of nationality. In Nazi Germany is only yesterday in a way. I mean, it did touch the fathers of, and so it's not something I've had that kind of immediate experience with culturally that I could speak to it very well. I have an impression. And so I don't find, because of the impression, I don't find it surprising that there would be that kind of animosity or fear of it. It takes looking inside. We connect ourselves with our fathers. We connect ourselves with our country. The experience that the United States has in a commonly accepted way would be the Holocaust of the American Indian. That's a lot longer ago. It's harder to, people's connections to it has changed. People don't want to look at ugly things. They don't have to. Again, what great art does is it says, you always have to.
The center theme of my work was always a human being, a child. I think children are the most important thing in any society and the most neglected. Because all these grown-ups are so busy with so many important things, but they forget that the future and the future of the civilization and the culture is the children, and they get the worst treatment. So I remember me as a child, nobody ever wanted to answer a question, nobody listened to me, and I was totally cut out of everything. And in that stage, a person is extremely vulnerable and very capable of things and very creative and very open and trusting. It's almost that my point of view, what I want to see the world through the eyes of children. And also when I paint, I want to approach the world and all the subject I'm dealing with the eyes of a child. I think every artist has basically really just one theme in his work, and all the different works of art are always a new attempt to formulate this one image. So every artist, I think, has a mission, and each work of art tries to describe this one thing that he wants to communicate. And whatever I wanted to show or demonstrate in these allegorical pictures, I could only do with children, because with a grown-up you get more distracted. So you can show certain things much better with a child, and very often I only focus on the face of a child, which is very hard to paint or to photograph because you have no lines, you have no characteristic features really. It's very soft, yeah? And everything is so subtle. It's also interesting that in art history, children were never a theme, unless it was a saint, a little Jesus, or it was an infant, the young king or something like that, or an angel, an allegoric or metaphorical figure. But children really were never taken serious. Amazing fairy tale written by Hans Christian Andersen that was also very important for me when I heard this as a kid. It's the Emperor's New Clothes, a world of very important grown-ups who all fall for a total stupid trick, you know, until the king ends up walking naked, and everybody agrees that he has a beautiful dress, you know. He looks amazing. And everybody's happy, and everybody sees it because they want to see it. And there's this one child that's suddenly in the way and points at this king and says, "Mom, why is this guy naked?" And that's the moment that breaks the spell. It is one kid. And maybe that's what I intend with my work. I want to be this kid who points at the emperor and say, "Why is he naked?"